Hi everyone, and welcome to our blood vessels map. This week takes a lot of memorization and there is so much to cover, but there are some tips and tricks on how to make it easier to memorize. So let's get started and I'll show you. All right, so the first thing I'm going to start off with is drawing the heart. Now, as we leave the left ventricle, we pass through the aortic semilunar valve and we end up in the ascending aorta. So let's label out different parts of the aorta. So the first part we end up in is something called the ascending aorta. So ascending, and I'm just going to use the letter A to abbreviate aorta. The next place that we end up is the aortic arch, which is right up top here. Next, the blood will flow to the descending aorta. Descending aorta. From then, we end up in it turns into the thoracic aorta. And as soon as we pass something called the diaphragm, we leave the thoracic cavity, and the next one on our list is the abdominal aorta. Now let's go and jump back up. So best way to memorize what branches off of what vessel is to draw it out and see how it all connects together. So the first branches to come off of the ascending aorta are something called the coronary arteries, and those are going to be the ones that are going to the heart. So you have both the left, and I'll just dot that right here. We have the left and the right coronary arteries. Next up, we have on the aortic arch. The aortic arch has three branches coming off of it. The first being the brachiocephalic trunk, brachiocephalic trunk. Next, we have the left common carotid artery. And then after that, we have the left subclavian artery. Okay. Now the brachiocephalic trunk here will branch off into two separate things. Brachiocephalic trunk will branch off into the right common carotid artery, and into the right subclavian artery. Now, if we were interested in following this diagram to the head, we would actually follow that up from here. So the right common carotid would then branch once again, and that would get you into the head. Now, if we take a look at some of our, like the arms, the left subclavian artery, as it travels through, it'll then become something called the axillary artery. After the axillary artery passes by the first rib, it then turns into the brachial artery. So I want you guys to notice that a lot of the arteries are kind of named based on their anatomical location. So that's also another really cool way to memorize and to learn the vasculature. So as we follow this through, you'll then get the ulnar and the radial arteries. You can kind of follow that through and create these and the upper extremities. If we were going to go from down to the abdominal aorta, there's a few really important things to note from the abdominal aorta. You have something called the celiac trunk, and the celiac trunk itself actually has three different branches. And I'll let you do the homework on that and label them in. You also have, on the abdominal aorta, you have the superior mesenteric artery, which supplies blood to the small intestine, mesenteric. And then you also have something called the inferior mesenteric artery. Okay. And then from then you can go into your lower extremities. This here is called the common iliac artery. And then from then it branches into two different things. The common iliac will branch into the common internal iliac artery, and then the external iliac artery. So internal iliac artery and the external iliac artery. And I do apologize if you can't read my handwriting. It is absolutely horrendous, but I highly encourage you to replicate something similar to this. And then you can go into a lot more detail with the upper extremities and the lower extremities. This diagram or the mapping and of the branching patterns really helps memorize things. And then another really helpful hint is the fact that a lot of arteries run right next to the veins, and most of the time they are labeled very similarly. So there you go. Those are your tips and tricks on how to memorize and how to be successful with this stuff. Good luck and happy studying.